Well, I'm back and you're here, so welcome to the Better Divorce Podcast. Just in case you don't have a clue who I am, I'm your host, Paulette Rigo. I am the CEO and founder of Better Divorce Academy, the author of number one best-selling book, workbook, audiobook, and online course, The Better Divorce Blueprint. And I'm also, yes, the host of the Better Divorce Podcast. Each week I come to you with experts in their fields to do a deep dive in a topic that hopefully will help you save time, money, and a boatload of heartache. So today I am interviewing Jodie Graham. Jodie is a divorce expert, coach, mediator. We kind of come from the same world. We believe in being part of the solution and not part of the problem. But today we're going to talk about her other expertise, the collaborative experience. So just briefly about Jodie, why would she be qualified to be here? She is a chartered professional accountant, trained university trained coach, and a registered collaborative professional dedicated to helping individuals navigate divorce with clarity, confidence, and dignity. She has nearly 30 years of experience in financial expertise and firsthand experience going through her own personal divorce. Join the club. Jodie combines professional skill and personal understanding to guide her clients through one of life's most challenging transitions. So let's talk a little bit, Jodie, about your expertise and why you find helping people through divorce something you want to do.
So for me, it really started, as I said, during my own divorce when I went through the collaborative process myself. And so I do have a little bit of a passion there. But when I was going through my own divorce, I realized that it cost me much less than what it cost my ex-husband because I do have the financial background. I was able to do my own financial analysis, do my own scenario building. And when all was said and done, it cost him 3 times as much as what it cost me because he didn't have the expertise that I have. And so, coming out of when I got my coaching certification, I kind of fell into it actually by friends and family reaching out saying, "Hey, I'm going through a divorce. I don't understand my numbers. I don't understand how to interpret the financial disclosure piece. Can you help me?"
Mm.
And so I started helping family and friends, and then they refer to family or friend, and so on. You know, the old commercial, you tell 2 friends, and so on and so on. And so I kind of just fell into it a little bit, but I have found it is absolutely where I'm meant to be. And I absolutely love helping people navigate the challenges that they go through and being able to help them get some confidence working through it. It's so rewarding.
It is. There's really nothing like seeing that individual or a couple come to you because I'm a mediator,
Hmm.
and they both have that horrific, pale, um, deer in the headlight look when
Yeah.
they're then foaming at the mouth and just, they're just absolutely besides themselves emotionally and
Hmm.
financially or legally. They're just overwhelmed with the words, the legalese 101, the lawyers speak. They've probably been up Googling for hours on end at 2 in the morning. And you can't trust everything you see
No.
online. And with AI, which is, I love AI. It's awesome. It's super cool. It's fun. It's always gets me like ideas of like, that's so intriguing, but you got to be careful, right? Like
Yeah.
what's real and what isn't real. So it is really, yeah, it's satisfying, right? Or, and not from a selfish point of view, if you're listening to the
No.
audio, Jody and I are both nodding. It isn't, I always try to remove myself from it just because I have experienced divorce personally. And that gives me a very clear indication of a lot of the traps and the processes and maybe some of the major mistakes that you can make because I made them all. Join the club,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Yeah, totally.
it also allows you to have so much more empathy and understanding that part of it because you can research it to death and have the procedures down and plaintiff and defendant and petition and complaint and discovery and interrogatories and domestic relations, financial affidavit, and et cetera, et cetera. So you're, absolutely exhausted from thinking and researching and organizing. But when it comes down to it, a lot of it is very emotional. So I think one of the things that can be so overwhelming is how to divorce, right?
Hmm.
The why that's important, because if one person is still at shock and denial, and the other is at acceptance, the why could be tricky. And if both parties are still at shock and denial, well, in my opinion, that would be called therapy, right? You really
Yeah.
need to go to couples counseling and therapy and mental health experts, do a deep dive in the why. Because if you're still kind of wallowing in that world of like, well, what's wrong with the marriage and why are we feeling this way and what's uncomfortable, then you're not ready for divorce. You know,
No,
you should
no.
try to do everything you can to quote unquote save the marriage. Now, the hard part is when one person is at shock and denial and the other has been sitting at acceptance, surrender, and letting go for a few years. That's really hard when one person is, on board and moving on and sort of, trying to be amicable and uncontested and compassionate, and the other is still looking at it like it's a train wreck. It's very difficult, and that's where divorce coaching can help, where we can
Hmm.
get them both on the same page, maybe not the
Right.
same letter, the same sentence, but at least maybe the same chapter, right? Where they're on the same ideas of like, okay, we really need to have these difficult conversations in a kind, respectful manner that's also productive, so they're moving forward. And a lot of the question is then goes into the how, right? Once they've figured out the why, and that takes time. The average people contemplate divorce as a few years too, on average.
Yeah.
And I find sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But once they've checked off the, okay, we know why, it's the how. And there are a few different methods. You can DIY it. Very small percentage of people can do that, but it does exist. I always support people through that process. And then next would be the methods of mediation. Is it court appointed, private with attorneys present, private without attorneys present? Mediation is a whole nother topic. And then we move into the amicable. In Georgia here and in the U.S., it's amicable divorce is another terminology that it's used, but collaborative or the collaborative process, and then leads into arbitration, having a private judge. And then, of course, there's good old fashioned litigation. And what we all try to
Hmm.
avoid is trials and appeals. But going back to that collaborative word, so many people have no idea. Collaborative? What the hell is that? They've never heard of it. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it looks like, how long it takes, how much it costs. So I want you, the expert now, I have coached people through the collaborative process. I'm going to say a dozen times. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. I'm not a collaborative expert. I know more than I probably care to know about it, just as being, in the trenches. But let's kind of take somebody through that. So let's answer that question of we're considering the collaborative process. What does it look like, and where do we start?
So, where you start is needing to find collaboratively trained lawyers. So, you can't just hire any lawyer to do the collaborative process, even though, like 98% of divorces can end up, like they can get settled out of court. But that doesn't mean that that's a collaborative process. So, you need to find specially trained collaborative lawyers. And there's websites out there, there's the International Association of Collaborative Professionals. And so what you're doing is you're finding these specially trained, and when they're what they're trained in is they're trained in interest-based negotiations, they're trained in mediation, and you're signing an agreement right at the very front to say you are agreeing that you will not take this to court, that you are going to settle this out of court, and you are going to settle it within the best interest of yourself, of your partner, and of your children. And
Mhm.
so you take that pressure of court off the table immediately.
Mhm.
So when you bring in your lawyers, it's you and your lawyer, your spouse and their lawyer, and you have what they have called the four-way meetings. And really you're having those conversations where you're looking at what's within the best interest of everybody. And it might not be the typical 50-50 split. You have the ability when you go through the collaborative process to deviate from some of the normal traditional decisions that get made. And so they really take that more interest-based approach. And it's interesting. I have worked with the same lawyer on a collaborative file as a litigation file. When I'm talking to her in the collaborative, very calm, very courteous, very, very collaborative type tone. Talking to that same lawyer on the litigation file, the claws are out, the insults are flying, it's very, very adversarial. And so even just the demeanor in the legal representation when they're in the collaborative versus when they're in litigation,
Mm.
totally different. Like it's almost eerie to see. It's like, who are you? So it's really coming together and looking at everything around what's within the best interest of all parties. And is there a different way that we can go about doing this rather than the traditional, this person gets that based on the law? You have more ability to find other alternative solutions, which is what
Right.
I think is so fantastic.
Very interesting. So initially, it's a decision between a couple to want
Yeah.
to avoid the litigation experience, right? They have,
Mhm.
but whether they've had that conversation at the kitchen table, on the phone, through email, whatever their circumstances are at the point where they've made the decision, we're going to go forward with divorcing. The two of them have now said, we want to avoid all things litigation, and we're committed to that. So
Yeah.
we do some research in our area, um, to find two attorneys who are collaboratively trained,
Yeah.
experienced, and in some ways can quote unquote work together. And they have
Yeah.
a rapport or a demeanor with one another where they're willing to answer the phone and speak in, to one another in a lawyer speak, but still in a very, like you said, the tone may be different.
Is very different. Yeah.
Because sometimes in litigation, attorneys will answer eventually, but maybe not quite so promptly. Or maybe,
Right.
depending on if they don't know this attorney, I don't have a relationship with that person. It could be, it takes time to develop that rapport and that
Yeah.
bond between the, shall we say, the group, that four-way, as you put it, right?
Yeah.
So now we have the two clients who are now represented by the two attorneys who are now in a pact, a bond, a relationship with each other. So they signed this contract saying,
Yeah.
we agree, all four of us agree that we're going to do everything in our power to move through the process here collaboratively without going down the road of litigation. So
Yeah. The
once it's
other
signed, what next?
So the other part that is different with this too is we have what we call neutrals, and I'm actually one of the neutrals. So I'm not a lawyer, I am a divorce coach and I'm a CPA, so I am considered one of the neutrals. So you can have family specialist neutrals, you can have financial neutrals, you can have mortgage broker neutrals, you can have real estate agent neutrals. So depending on the circumstance and what's happening in their particular situation, is you can bring in a third party to help you navigate. The neutrals are also trained in collaborative. So we have to have and meet the requirements of going through the collaborative process. So we can come in. So I often will come in and help to get the financial disclosure done. We'll have business valuators that will come in and do the business valuation. If you're wanting to sell the house, they might bring in the mortgage broker to start look at what are the options. Can one person even afford to buy the other one out? Would they qualify for that mortgage? And so they can bring in neutral parties to help look at all of the different aspects of it so that you're making an informed decision as you're moving forward.
Mm,
What I find or a real difference rather is the litigation process tends to be a win-lose and the lawyers fight for that win-lose. Whereas when you're doing the collaborative process, they're really trying to find the win-win. What's
mm,
going to be the win-win for both parties, which is what takes some of that adversarial out because everybody kind of feels like they got what they needed. But it's that holistic view of bringing in all of the different parties. And some people think, oh, that just adds to the expense. When really, if they're spending time with me as the neutral, then they'd be spending less time with their lawyer. And my rates are a little bit less than the lawyer's rates too,
sure.
right? So actually can help save you money when you start working with the neutrals, because you're not spending all that time with the lawyers trying to figure some of that out. You're actually spending some of the time with the neutrals. And the
Right.
neutrals are actually helping you get that comfort level so that you're making a decision faster with the lawyers.
Mm. Yeah, I like to explain it to people like spokes of a wheel, that you've got
Hmm.
the couple and the attorneys in the center, but all of those additional spokes of the wheel would be experts in their field. So on
Yeah.
one side, you have the psychological, mental, emotional, where there might be a mental health practitioner, a parenting coordinator, maybe a pediatric or juvenile therapist if there was children involved, and maybe some issues, or special needs is also another concern,
Yeah.
which is so I don't know, relevant now, in education or medical needs of the children. So, and even the spiritual sexual side, but there's been like some issues on that, where that's the legal people like, that's not my idea of a good time. So, having those kind of say, bohemian woo woo side of divorce. I mean, I was a yoga teacher, so I can talk like that, but you know, but on that side, that's really very emotional and gut wrenching and
Yeah.
really hard. There can be those other people in that side of it. So I like to call that the bowl of emotions side. And
Hmm.
then on the other side, you have the judicial, the legal, the financial, the residential, lending, insurance, taxes, and yes, co-parenting. So you've got all those experts that kind of put it together. You've got the mental, emotional on one side, judicial, legal on the other, financial. But then it's all just sort of like the spokes of a wheel, or people might not know what this is, but I like to call it the Rolodex approach of divorce.
Oh,
Like,
you're dating yourself now,
I know,
Paulette.
I'm 60, so I'm bringing on. So I used to love my Rolodex because I could just whip it around in little circles and go, oh, there's the person, pull it in, pop it back in. And I could easily add someone's business card to it or jot it down. Of course, now you got to pick out the phone and go through the contacts, and there's just
Hmm.
no reference point. I like pretty little pictures, and I could like have it and go, oh, I know who that person is. But anyway, it's the Rolodex approach. So you could say, I need a realtor or a certified
Yeah.
divorce real estate expert, or I need a certified divorce lending professional. So you have kind of that team approach to somebody. I
Yeah.
have worked in a few instances where it's a flat rate for the team. So people don't get so crazy about, oh, it's this much for this professional and that for this professional. And oops, this one's this and that one's that. It's just, listen, you're going to have a team. You get everyone you need. It's a flat rate. They have everyone they need. It's a flat rate. I've seen a couple of those in brick and mortars, but not
That would
necessarily.
be great.
Yeah, I've seen a few of them. And I also trained with the woman, Karen Stewart, that wrote the book Clean Break. She has
Yep.
9 franchises in Canada, which is where I also did some collaborative or amicable mediation training with a firm I was with about 5 years ago. So learning a little bit of that, and it's
Yeah.
very popular in Canada, but not so
Yeah.
much in
I'm
the
actually I'm on their team.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
know Karen's, I love her book. If you're ever curious, the book is called Clean Break. I highly recommend reading it. It may not be appropriate for you, but you'll learn a lot in if you dig that kind of reading. So like I do, kind of a divorce nerd.
Me
So
too.
I don't know anybody has a glossary of books on divorce like I do. I go, yeah, here's my library. So you've got this team approach, right? So as Jodi, you were saying, you come in as that neutral, that maybe it's a mortgage person, maybe it's a realtor, maybe a mental health practitioner. No, you may or may not need all those people. So it
No,
isn't
some
like,
of them don't ever use
yeah,
them,
it's like if
and
you
that's
don't have
fine.
kids, then what you're not going to need a parent coordinator. So if you don't own real estate, then you probably don't need a realtor. So you're gonna need the professional that you need. Now, I find that some of the confusion when I mention it to people, they think it's very like woo woo, or kind of like the conscious uncoupling motion movement with we're all going to sit down, hold hands, and sing kumbaya and get
Yeah.
along, and sage the room, and everyone's going to we're going to meditate together. And I know I'm being a little sarcastic, but there is this perception that collaborative, maybe it's just the word, right? We're all going to collaborate, and it's kind of tricky, right? With that word, like, what does that really mean? So I think the education people need is what it truly is versus what you might think it is.
I like to kind of liken it to, do you want more control in your divorce? Do
That's a good
you
way to
want
put
to do you want to take more control in the solution that gets
it.
determined and gets decided? Or do you want a group of lawyers and a judge to make that decision for you? They don't know you, they don't know your kids, they don't know your circumstance. So, do you want a judge to make a decision on what's within the best interest of your kids? Or do you want to decide what's in the best interest of your kids? And
Right.
that's the beauty of the collaborative process is with the collaborative process, you actually get a say in what the outcome of your divorce is.
Yes.
You actually get to take more control. And that's why when I do coaching and I'm trying to help them get that clarity, it's to help them be able to advocate for themselves through that process, to be able to articulate what their needs are through that process, and be able to take more control of the outcome of that process.
Mm,
I would hate for a judge to tell me how to manage and navigate the parenting with my own children. Let me decide that. Let my me and my ex-spouse decide that.
sure. And that
So,
that is a risk people take that they may not be aware of. If you're going right for litigation, one is the plaintiff, one is the defendant, you're now in a lawsuit. Your
mhm,
attorneys are now going to vie for, well, Your Honor, for the following reasons, my client deserves A, and Your Honor, for the following reason, my client deserves A, or whatever you're arguing over. And the judge now has to look at who's more credible, who's more believable, whose evidence is more, I don't
yeah,
know, engaging,
appealing.
compelling, strategy, leverage of the whole thing. And there are some cases which they really do need to litigate. I'm in the
Oh,
same
100%.
3%. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's less, depending on your situation. So, but for the most part, for most people, if you do have a relationship with your spouse that is relatively respectful, amicable, you have common ground on some levels, then it's something to really consider. I would like to segue a little bit with the time comparison and the cost comparison, because that's a question I get a lot too. What does DIY take? I don't know, 90 days, depending, if you both walk in and you fill out your court filing fee and your, $250 or whatever it is. And I heard somebody was just $450 in California now. So wow.
Not
I know.
here.
It's crazy. It does differ. So divorce is never free, anyone. So just ever
Mhm.
that there's still a filing fee that you have to pay. They don't waive that. Now it's so. First, low percentage of people they can DIY. Mediation, depending on how long it takes, is your mediator hourly? Do they have a flat rate? Are you engaging in mediation for a month, 3 months, 6 months? Depending on your situation, what is the cost of that, the time? It's usually, I'm going to say 6 months or shorter. You may disagree, Jody, but I find,
Mhm.
mediation usually typically lasts 3 to 6 months from the decision to do it till you have that MOA in hand. Could be shorter, could be longer, but on average, collaborative arbitration. We'll go back to collaborative arbitration. God, that could be as quick as a day. My goodness. So if you have a prenup or a postnup, but it
Yeah.
could be long. I've known some arbitrations that go a few months, and litigation. The average is in the U.S. here 8 to 24 months. The
Yeah, I would
shortest
say it's
I'm
about the
seeing is
same
8.
here.
The longest 2 to 3 years. So, what are you seeing in Canada now for the duration of litigation?
I think it's probably about the same.
Okay,
It takes a while to get in. They've actually just changed the rules here in Alberta where the judges won't even talk to you if you haven't tried mediation.
right. Yeah, it's coming.
So, yeah, so
It's
you
not
have to
quite
go through
that
that.
emphatic in the States yet, but I think they're leaning towards mediation being a prerequisite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes now I'm seeing that they'll file and then the judge will say, okay, you two are pretty close. Why don't you go down the hall and work with one of our, court appointed mediators, or the a judge is now ordering the litigants to schedule a mediation, whether that's that immediately or a little bit down the road. But I haven't seen it prior. Although the times are
Yeah.
changing, we'll find out, and
Yeah.
every state is a little bit different. But let's go back to the collaborative process. What do you find is the average amount of time that the collaborative process will take?
It can vary, and a lot of it depends on how willing the parties are to negotiate, right? And
Mhm.
that's what it comes down to. But I certainly the ones that I've been involved in, 6 months to a year, and lots of that is waiting for the financial disclosure. to come forward, right? And that's where
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, divorce can happen faster if you're willing to work within the process, right? Like if you're willing to get the financial disclosures done and get it done quickly and swiftly and organized in a way, and you're willing to negotiate, you can get through the collaborative process fairly quickly. Where it starts to drag is if you want a business valuation done 3 times because you don't agree with the valuation that came forward, or you need to get the real estate agent to look at the house again and again and again because the market's changed and you think you're going to get a few more dollars out of it. I always tell my clients, really look at the cost benefit analysis of what you're looking at. And I know that sometimes that word just overwhelms them, but don't spend $500 talking to your lawyer for a $250 item. Right. And
Yes.
so, I would say, like I said, and I don't, the lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not dealing with it all the time, but the ones that I've been involved in, usually 6 months or so,
Mm-hmm.
you can get through it if you're willing to come to the table and negotiate in good faith.
Right.
Right. Mine was a couple of months.
Right.
That's it.
No, for time, and we'll come back to the cost, but I do want to kind of segue into the time. And I'm finding that too. And Jodi is so correct. It does vary hugely. If both parties are on board, they fill out the DERFA, they're, transparent, and they've got all the, financials and other questions, parenting plan or whatever they're working on, prepared and organized. Maybe you do that earlier with a coach. So you're walking into it with your little
Yeah.
briefcase and your mindset, and you're really organized and structured and researched, and you feel resourced and prepared, right? It will be a lot different than if you walk in and go, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
What to
Where do I
do?
start?
Where do I start? Right. Because they're all just going to say, oh, well, this could take a while and that will cost you money. So going into
Mm-hmm.
any preparation, any procedure unprepared or not knowing is going to cost a lot more money. And even if it were free, and it's not, it will take a lot more time. So you have
Yeah.
to look at your ROI. I always say, are you willing to spend $1 to get $1? Probably not. I don't know. Maybe it depends. I don't know. If you are willing to spend $1 to get 5, maybe, yeah, sure, but we're talking about much bigger numbers, but are you willing to spend 10 to get $1? Probably not. Right.
No.
So,
But it's amazing how many people do,
right. Every
you
time
know?
you walk into the courtroom, I would always say it would probably cost me 5 or 6 grand to by the
Yeah.
time I filed the motion or whatever. Don't forget my case took almost a decade. So, had to, there was a reason for doing it. I'm nothing frivolous in my definition of filing frivolous motions, but you want to make sure that, we'd stack them up too. Like there'd be more than one reason to go. So that
Yeah.
$6,000 investment would yield 30 or 40,000. You don't want to spend 30 or 40,000 to yield 6,000. So you really have to look at that. And is it even worth arguing about? So very good idea to be clear on that ahead of time. Now, if you are collaborating and it's maybe going, I don't know, 6 months, or it's taking a while, and one or both of the parties starts to feel like this process isn't moving forward, that you're not making progress, that
Yeah.
maybe the attorney isn't really vying for you, it's not a good match, it's just it just doesn't feel like a good fit for you, and maybe your spouse is feeling the same way or you don't even know it. I have worked with couples or clients where one or both of the parties have decided to pull out of the collaborative process.
Yeah.
And people pull out of it for many different reasons, but let's just say they feel like it's not going in their direction that they would like it to, whether it be financially or otherwise. It doesn't always have to be financial. And they do decide to pull out, which you can decide to pull out,
Yeah,
right?
you can.
You're voluntarily deciding that you're engaging in this process. It isn't, no one came to your house with the gun to your head and said, come here, you have to do this, sign here. This is all voluntarily. But if you do decide to pull out, then both of those attorneys and both of those sets of documents cannot be utilized, and it's
No.
like starting all over again. And
Yeah.
that's always what I have felt would have been the negative aspect of it. I love the fact that you're in control and you're really not allowing other people to take over or make decisions that has to do with the rest of your life. But now, on the other hand, if for whatever reason, again, one or both of the parties choose to pull out of the collaborative, decision, then you got to start all over again.
Yeah, you
And
do.
it's a
You
little bit of
can't
a
carry on
risk.
with the same lawyers. You have to find new lawyers. Now, if one party is feeling like maybe their lawyer isn't representing them the way they want to be represented, that doesn't stop them from finding another collaborative lawyer and rejoining and
Good
coming
to know.
back into
Good to
that
know.
process. They can do that.
Right.
But if the parties have decided that, you know what, this collaborate, it's just not working, we've hit a stalemate, we need to actually go down the traditional, yeah, you're right, you're starting all over again. But I think that's, in a way, that's part of the incentive, right?
Mhm.
Part of the incentive to make it work and stick it out and do the best you can to get to that resolution is because you don't want to have to start all over again. You don't want to throw the money away that you've already spent on this. And so that is actually
And
part
the
of what
time
keeps
investment too.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've invested this much time and this much money and this much emotion getting it to
Energy.
this point. Do I really want to start all over again when we really have hit a stalemate on one item? And that's where sometimes they will also bring in a neutral mediator to
Right.
actually mediate back and forth between the collaborative lawyers to try and help to get them to resolution. That's when
Right.
they will pull in a neutral often, because if they're hung up and stuck on maybe the business side of things, that's where they might bring in a business valuator to help them talk it out. They might bring in, if they've hit a stalemate on parenting plans, they might bring in a family neutral to help navigate and mediate that. And so if you're in the collaborative process and you're hitting that stalemate, really stop and ask yourself, do you really want to take a step out, or are you willing to actually be a little bit more vulnerable, put yourself out there and bring in some neutrals to help you get to that over the finish line? Because
Mm.
really it comes down to, most of the time, if you've entered the collaborative process, you probably can get through it without having to leave if you are willing to negotiate. Normally it's because somebody's digging their heels in
They
unrealistically.
won't negotiate. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Hmm. Very true. Now, I have seen cases where somebody is very optimistic on board at the beginning, and then things get tough or difficult. And like you said, they dig in their heels and they really had no
Hmm.
intention of negotiating, but they wanted to
Yes.
just sort of placate and pretend, dare I say, fake it. I did have one client up in Connecticut a few years ago. She found me when she was in, I would say, a third of the way through, half of the way through the collaborative process, and we made some progress, and she moved along, but it was very clear, maybe 2 3 months down the line, that he was really just kicking the can down the road, right? Not,
Oh,
he moved out of state, and there was a lot of hidden assets, and the children were teenagers going to college, and the circumstances were just that it was really just not worth the fight. It was like they
yeah.
were arguing over, or he was arguing, or they were arguing over things that really didn't need to be argued over in great detail. A judge would literally have rolled their eyes and said, "Wait, are you people wasting my time?" So
Hmm.
that's where you can get into the weeds in that, whereas it's private and you can entertain those conversations. Where in litigation, sometimes they're really not willing to, they don't have time for it. There's 55,000 cases right behind you down the hall.
Right.
We need to keep moving this case along, like, okay, let's come to a decision. And if you can't come to a decision, I'm making the decision for you. And that's sometimes where you have to have the finality. Litigation is 100% successful because the judge will make the decision for you,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not. And sometimes high conflict people don't like authority. They're very resistant to having other people make decisions for you. So it can get to be a
I
battle.
Yeah, I think some people go into the collaborative process thinking that they're going to be able to manipulate their partner,
Yes, yes,
and they're going to use it as a power dynamic. And then I think sometimes when that falls apart is when they realize the lawyers aren't going to let them do that.
correct. Yeah, it
Right?
is
Like I have one client right now, or it was going to be a client, and he started getting some armchair legal advice as far as what he needed, what he thought it was going to be. And that was going to be a mediation. And it's like, he has no intention of negotiating in good faith, I don't think. And so it's one of those things where I think some people go into collaborative because they think they're going to be able to use it to manipulate their partner into giving up more.
Yeah.
And I think they're in for a rude awakening when they get in there and the lawyers are like, oh, no, no, that's not the way it's going to work. And so, and at that point, they're like, nope, this is done. And they walk away from it. But
Sure.
so
Yeah.
you're right.
That's usually when it fails, but the good news is you have another alternative. You can move on and
Mm-hmm.
past it. And, you've pretty much tested the water. You've litmus tested the sticky items, even though you can't use that, documentation and those attorneys. It doesn't mean you haven't lived through it and you don't have a muscle memory of what you lived through. And
Yeah.
you can kind of pick up and say, all right, let's pick up where we left off. Unfortunately, it does take more time and there's significant costs in that
Yeah.
moving forward. But now, what do you find is if the collaborative process is successful, what are you finding, in your average, like you said, 6 months to a year, what do you find is the average cost in comparison to litigation?
Oh, I'm trying to remember now. I think it's probably still, and of course, I'm looking at Canadian
Of
dollars, not
course, we
American
understand.
dollars.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I think you can get through it with, for the both parties, 16 to 20,000 still, because you're still talking two parties, right? You're still talking two lawyers. You still are talking, bringing in some neutrals and all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's some that are less and some that are more, but
Mhm.
I think on average, even when I look at my own case, by the time we were all said and done, we were probably at about 16 to $18,000. And we were done in probably 2 to 3 months. We had 2 or 3 different four-way meetings. We had our individual meetings, but by the time all was said and done, we were probably at about 16 to 18,000. And I would think for a couple that's willing to come in, negotiate in good faith, and get things done, that's probably pretty close to the average, I would think.
And you're right, depending on where you live, might have a lot to do with the cost too.
Absolutely.
If you're living in an urban
Absolutely.
area, well, you probably have an easier time finding collaborative attorneys, right? But it might be uh, more costly. Whereas if you're, in a more area that doesn't have trained collaborative attorneys, and they're harder to find, it might be more expensive. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And like we even here in the area where I live, there's lawyers that charge $300 an hour, and there's lawyers that charge $660 an hour.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So
Same here.
it just depends on the lawyers that you choose too. And that doesn't necessarily, I always say cost doesn't necessarily make them better.
True.
Right.
And it's such a range, Jodi, correct. I find that when I first started, going into this world, learning about mediation way back in 2007, 8, mediators were still 250 an hour. That's what they just
Mm-hmm.
were, and most attorney, mediation is 250, 300, maybe 350, somewhere in there. But
Yeah.
mediation hasn't tripled in
No.
expenses. It's kept to no attorney's fees. Again, my first attorney way back when was 475 an hour, and I think he's now 675. But that was 15, 18 years ago. So it
Yeah.
was going on 18, 20 years ago. So the attorney's fees have gone up, but it does have a lot to do with, are you in a major metropolitan area?
Mm-hmm.
The New York, the LA, the Atlanta, the Dallas, the Miami, the Houston, the Chicago, that kind of thing. Or are you in, I don't know, Main Street, USA, Oklahoma or something. So it might be different. And she's right. I mean, if somebody is fresh out of law school and they're only charging, I don't know, 175, 200, $250 an hour, don't necessarily think that they're not trained and really committed to representing a client well and fully, to advocate for them. But it also doesn't mean that if somebody's $800 an hour that they're the best fit for you. So
That's
you
right.
don't really have to go in with your list of questions, do your research, get some testimonials, and really make sure you leave. After interviewing a few, that you really feel like you've made a good fit, because you're going to hang out with that person for a
Yeah.
while. So you better like them. Not necessarily that you're going to be best buddies with that person, but you really better have a strong rapport, and understand their communication style and your communication style. It does make for a more successful experience collaboratively or litigation. Very important picking the right attorney.
Well, and choosing an attorney that is not going to allow you to have them be your therapist, right? Like you
Yep.
want an attorney that's going to say, you know what, that's beyond the legal scope of things. That's something you need to talk to your counselor about, your coach about, whatever, and not just sit back and just, wait and let you spill it all out. And you want
Until
somebody
you get
that's going
that
to say, you know
house
what, that is
bill.
outside the
Yeah.
scope of the legal,
Yeah. Very true.
right? And so because when I look at my situation, I was in and out with my lawyer because I was doing everything on my side. My ex-husband was spending hours with his lawyer because he was feeling that level of overwhelm, and his lawyer was his financial advisor, his therapist, his whatever, and he spent way more money than I did because he used his lawyer for things other than just the legal side of things. And
Right.
so you want a lawyer that's going to say, hang on a second, I'm not the best person to answer that. You want somebody who is versed in that area to
Yes.
assist you. And that's where it would be beneficial if lawyers would pull in the neutrals a little bit more often than sometimes they do. I think they often will think, well, we got this. It's pretty straightforward. It's not about being straightforward. It's about helping the person that's struggling to navigate it in a more cost effective way.
Well, I've been very fortunate to work with a large number of attorneys all over the country who believe in the work I do, and knowing that I don't negate any legal counsel whatsoever, but I kind of pick up the pieces of some really
Mm-hmm.
more emotional aspects of the case based on their situation. Like you said, to go to a family mental health practitioner and to start asking legal questions, even if you don't realize you're doing it, is a big problem. And going to
Mm-hmm.
a counselor at law, and starting to manage them or treat them like they're your therapist, will just cost you a boatload of money. So you have to be
Yeah.
very careful that you're using the right professional for the right job. One of the major advantages of working with me, both in mediation and coaching, is I have a very large Rolodex of professionals, and I know my
Yeah. Me
lane,
too.
and I know my expertise, and I know what I can do. And I also clearly know the other professionals that can help people when I can't. Um, I don't pretend to solve real estate issues or mortgage issues or mental health issues. I don't do health insurance. I don't prepare taxes. I know many very incredible certified divorce financial analysts and forensic accountants and private investigators, and many different types of experts that I have to pull in based on how complex the case is. And that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the benefits of having an expert in the divorce experience is, like,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this, but let me make sure I figure it out, because there's the overwhelm that people feel. Jodi, I know you can
Yeah.
relate to that, is astounding. And one of the major top 12 divorce mistakes people make is letting the stress of the divorce wreak havoc on their health, and the
Yeah.
overwhelm and the fear that they have, as well as the hope that they'll still change, that we can wave a magic wand and make them all better, or make ourselves all better. It is very important that you don't allow the stress and the overwhelm of divorce to start to wreak havoc on your health, because it can do some devastating damage to you. You've really got to learn to manage this very stressful, life-changing situation
Yeah.
wisely. It's very important. So make sure you get the
Yeah.
right professional.
Yeah, 100%. Like, well, I myself, I had a breakdown during my marriage or during my
Mm,
divorce, right? And that's part of how I got into doing this as well. It's because like I didn't want to see anybody doing and going through what I went through. And so that's as
right,
a coach, I help them on both sides of things, right? Like the legal, the emotional, the financial, to help them get out of that level of overwhelm.
right. I was very blessed that when I was going through my divorce, I also found some other modalities of things that I was studying. I became a birth doula and I helped
Oh,
women
nice.
learn, birth babies. And I became a lactation consultant because I had a very difficult time breastfeeding. And I became a yoga teacher trainer, a macrobiotic cook, an Ayurvedic consultant. And I just found all these other modalities of healing and living in full alignment with my soul and Dharma, as we call it,
Yeah.
and finding my purpose. Little did I realize this hell I went through having a career that was chosen for me in a previous life with teaching performing arts for over 20 years was not my dharma. Like I was good at
Hmm.
it. It was fun. I loved it. I choreographed over 350 original pieces of choreography. But I never said to myself, oh, I found my purpose in life.
Right.
But I really loved helping people transform their lives, write books, start careers, get out of painful relationships, and get really into a place where you could live your best life. And unfortunately, divorce isn't going away. I believe in love. I believe in marriage. I'm happily remarried. But to see the anguish that people go through on a daily basis, and it affects every aspect of their life when it doesn't have to. Very,
Hmm.
very glad to see that more and more younger people are realizing that there are better, more dignified, smarter, better ways to divorce or try to save your marriage if you can. So I'm really glad we talked about collaborative divorce. I think it's a topic that sort of, people mention it, but they don't really know what it is. And they're not really sure it's an alternative or a method that would maybe work for them. So do a little research, everyone. Don't discount it. Think about it and go look at the criteria. Are you and your spouse on relatively the same page of wanting to avoid litigation? Could you be committed to negotiating? Are both parties willing to at least entertain that conversation? If you are, do some research in your area, see if you can't find some collaborative attorneys to interview or to
Hmm.
do a consultation with. You might say, yep, that's not for me, but you might also walk out of there and say, I'm so glad I learned it. So what is the best way for people to learn more about you, Jodi, so they could, follow you, learn more about you, and perhaps work with you if you're obviously in the Ontario,
You
right?
can't. No, I'm in Alberta.
Alberta, excuse me.
Alberta. Yeah.
Alberta.
So my website is empoweredcollaboration.ca.
Perfect. So
So everything you need to learn about me is on there.
and if you're curious, reach out to Jodi. She's more than happy to speak to you about the collaborative
Absolutely.
process and teach you.
Yeah.
If you have any other additional questions, feel free to reach out to her. And you know how to find me, betterdivorceacademy.com, if you're looking for simple, standard, or super mediation services. And right now I'm working in 43 states and Canada, although I do specialize now in couples that want to avoid litigation. I also am a certified divorce coach helping individuals with high conflict cases that typically and unfortunately go to trial. So that's what I do. Love every minute of it. Thank you for being a listener. Thank you, Jodi, for your time. And until
Thank
next
you.
time, everybody, make it better because it's that or staying stuck where you are, and we don't want that. So end of conversation. Make it better. Talk soon.